Change is visible, external, an event. Transition is internal and it's completely invisible.
From my experience, that people really underestimate the impact of change.
Founders say, no, we'll deal with this later. No, actually, this is what's happening right now. This is the future of your company right now, or the team dynamics. Simply, you have to have these conversations with people. You can't present a change in a command and control style. I have to say, I don't think I've ever met a founder who said to me, I want to become a leader. They say, I want to be a founder, I want to be a CEO. A CEO will sometimes ask you about executive coaching, and they'll say, well, what's in it for me? Well, it'll just make your life better. You'll be happier.
Pretty good reason, I would say. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Abbas, and this is Hiring on All Cylinders. Today, I'm joined by Brian Evje, fractional HR consultant, exec advisor at Astia, and higher advisory board member.
Hello, Chris.
Hello, Brian. I'm really glad to be in London and sitting down with you today.
It's great to be here. It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
So today we've got a really interesting topic, which is invisible change. Now, you mentioned this to me when we were chatting.
Yes.
And I was like, what's invisible change, Brian?
Yes.
So I guess we could start there.
Yes.
Can you just explain what invisible change is?
Of course. Most people think of change as the things that happen to them or the things that they start doing after stop doing something else, so as an event. And that's really what change is. And this is a framework that goes back to the 80s and 90s from an American named William Bridge. And he drew a distinction between change, which is the external event that largely happens to us. I leave job one, I start job two. And then the transition between those two changes, which is my internal, emotional, psychological, mental reorientation from job one to job two. And his distinction was pretty important because most of us think that change occurs, and for most of us, change actually happens to us in the business sense. The company says, we're going in this direction, and then they say, nope, we're going in that direction. And so it's actually inflicted on us. And when it's done very badly, it's a pretty painful infliction. But the distinction between the two is really, really important for leaders and for managers who really want to understand how to help their teams, help their companies evolve and move through these different phases. So change is one thing, transition is the other thing. Change is visible, external, an event. Transition is internal and it's completely invisible. It's emotional and it's usually overlooked in most companies.
So are you saying that it's kind of the expectation you have as what's going to happen is the internal, and external is what is actually happening to you?
Yes, that's a good way of looking at it. The internal is a sense of really, in the worst case, it's a sense of loss. And if you think of something that you've done in your life, a new skill you've picked up or a new hobby, you start from a position of relative ignorance. I want to learn how to play golf, and I don't know anything about golf, and I've seen it on television, and so I go out and I try. And what you have to do in order to step into learning something new or being in a new situation is stop doing the things that you didn't do. So in a sense, I'm losing the old habit that I had. I'm losing this sense of identity and skill that I had. And in a business world, it's in a company setting, especially in startups, in high growth companies and high change companies, it's really, really significant to take an early stage group of people and have them running as fast as they can in a particular direction and then say, whoa, wait a second, we have to pivot. And pivot is such a benign word and it makes it sound pretty innocent. And yet all of those people have invested so much of their identity, so much of this transitional ingredient, if you will, into doing what they were doing really well. And now the company says, the founder says, oh, nope, go this way. And some teams can absorb that successfully. Most teams can't. And certainly over time, all of these different changes mount up and companies will focus on change A, B, C, D, E. They won't focus on the transitions in between all of those. So all of a sudden you go down the road, a couple of years, you've got 6 changes, you've got 6 transitions that have been largely ignored, but all of that instability is there. It's present in the team dynamics. It's present in the company that's gone from 10 people to 75 people. And this is really where most founders just don't understand that what they're doing right now has significant and real consequences to when they grow. So a lot of founders will tell me, oh, no, we'll get to the HR stuff, we'll get to the org stuff, we'll get to the culture stuff later. Well, later is actually right now. You're dealing with the future from a team perspective and from an interpersonal perspective. Right now is the future. So the better founders recognize this. The better founders who have been through this and have really taken their lumps recognize that this is what happens.
Yeah, when you're talking, it actually reminds me of this common statement that people make when they're hiring for startups, which is there's this kind of startup person who can handle the change and pivot, as you said, or there isn't. There's this corporate person who likes to be in this stable, secure kind of environment that kind of moves along like sequentially. Do you think that you are naturally predisposed to be able to handle invisible change, or do you think there's ways of coping? I guess we can talk about some of those now. There's ways of learning how to cope and handle that kind of change.
Talentful provides flexible recruiting solutions to the world's most ambitious companies. Are you thinking about ways to add flexibility to your talent function? With recent market volatility and hiring set to return to growth mode in the near future, there's never been a better time to choose the right partner to help you scale. Talentful's embedded sourcing, recruiting, coordination, and talent advisory services have been trusted by the world's leading brands. Companies such as Atlassian, Microsoft, Expedia, Pinterest, Waymo, and more. Whether you're hiring across engineering, go-to-market, or G&A, Talentful has got you covered. To find out how Talentful can help you, visit talentful.com.
I think the answer is yes. I think certain people are predisposed to certain situations, and if you are more innately aligned to situations that are less stable, more creative, more spontaneous, terrific. That's a plus. In leadership language, we would look at this and we would say, it actually will help if you have an understanding of how to speak to a group of people, if you're comfortable with it, and if you're comfortable with it sort of innately. Now there's a way that you can learn how to be better at it, obviously. But it's helpful if this is something that you're disposed to, as opposed to something that you really, really find a lot of trouble with. So I think the challenge really from both sides, when startups say, yes, you have to be ready for change because we're changing all the time, so you've got to be a change person. In a way, that's an alibi that founders and startup leaders tell themselves so that they don't actually have to lead these change phases. They can just say, we're changing. Again, we're pivoting. It sounds very benign, and in some ways it's meant to, I think, reduce the anxiety. Oh, no, this isn't a change, it's a pivot. And yet, people are smarter than that. People know what's going on, and same thing happens in big companies. People in big companies are insulated from all of these dynamics because of all of the stuff within a company, the history of the company and the number of divisions and all of the people and the departments and the this and that, and so it's very easy for the problems of a big system to actually just get lost in the system. And in a startup, there's nowhere to hide. The problem comes in and bang, it comes right at you. You're a serial entrepreneur. You're a serial CEO. There's nowhere for you to hide. There's no one you can really pass this off to, right? You can't just say, "Oh no, it's somebody else's job," because everyone is looking to you for this. But if you were the CEO of Unilever, it's pretty easy to say, "Nope, I'm just going to let this one go by."
I've definitely learned from my experience that people really underestimate the impact of change and what it does to people and how difficult it is, especially as you get some kind of scale. Changing an organizational behaviors is incredibly difficult, and you should pay attention to how you manage that change. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And this gets to the work of leadership, and these are very, very established leadership and organizational principles. This is not new. The organizational theory has been knocking around for 60, 70, in some cases 80 years. And the most progressive leadership frameworks will absolutely reject the notion of a hero leader and the charismatic leader and the great man theory, which is where it probably came from originally. And if you really, really want to be an ethical leader and use your power ethically and be effective, you will focus on the team. And that's what a lot of startup leaders, founders, CEOs, leaders, and managers are unable to do because they think that they have to be demonstrating their capabilities and executing and doing all the time. They can't actually, they have to show that they're qualified. And so it can be hard, and this is a paradox of a startup, because startups are really when you need teams to be at their highest functioning, simply because of all this instability. So the more that a startup engineering manager can actually release themselves from the pressure of providing all the answers and showing up the right way all the time and being the one who's, again, this heroic leadership model, the more they can say, okay, the problems we face right now are what are called adaptive problems. We don't have clear answers for them. We don't know how to solve them. So we need everybody to pitch in. And I'm the manager, so I need to create and maintain the environment where the team, the group, can succeed in this shared purpose. So I really, really need to let go of any sort of hero complex I have. I really need to embrace the messiness of being the one that's facilitating these and dancing in some way with the teams. And this is where change comes in, because you can't actually force people to change. You can't just tell people to change. You've got to, if you want to do it responsibly, you've got to actually move them forward in stages and in phases, and you've got to be very, very receptive to these dynamics of, again, fear and a sense of loss and a sense of uncertainty about what's supposed to happen next.
And from your point of view, before we dive into to this, if you had to distill down like one reason why a leader listening to this should care about invisible change, what would that be?
Focusing on change as a leader or a manager will simply make your life better and easier. Trying to control a situation, especially one as complicated as managing teams, managing people, it's a fool's errand. And the more we try to control things, the harder it is. The harder it is to actually happen. The harder it is to get to the result that you want. But the more stress you'll be under, the more the discomfort will seep into your non-work life and your non-work relationships, and the more it will prevent your own growth. So focusing on change and focusing on teams changing together, even though it's inconsistent. I don't mean to say that it all moves as a monolith, but focusing on proper change simply releases so much stress from a manager and a leader. It creates different stress because the best way to do it is actually give back the work, the change work, to the team. And that creates a certain amount of intentional conflict that you have to manage. But the short answer is, what's in it for me? A CEO will sometimes ask about executive coaching, and they'll say, what's in it for me? Well, it'll just make your life better. You'll be happier.
It's a pretty good reason, I would say. So with that, I guess the first step is, how can a leader spot change in the organization coming, and what are some of the first things they should think about?
The first thing is really to recognize that this is an actual phenomenon. It's not pseudoscience. This is really how people behave, and there are effective ways to go through it, and there are ways that are really, really quite damaging. So the first thing always is to just accept the premise. Secondly, if a leader has been leading effectively up to the point of change, then the change process itself, moving through the transition and getting to a new state, will probably be easier. So you always have to back up a bit and say, how well have you been leading up to this point? How inclusive have you been with the team composition? How fair and consistent are you with your decisions? How equitable are things? How do people feel about this? I mean, if you're running a team that has great dysfunction, there's really not a whole lot you can do when a big change comes to you can't fix both things at once. So in that situation, I would really recommend probably just focusing most on the change and fixing the dysfunction after. But that's all hypothetical. The signs really are the level of change that you're going through, the sense of loss, of how much loss people are giving up. How many things people are giving up. So what's their sense of loss? How many new things are you looking for people to do and do differently? And what's the new relationship structure supposed to look like? If a team is supposed to be going in this direction and you want them to go in that direction, then you've got to decide, well, what's the new direction supposed to look like? And what are the new relationships and the new commitments and the new things that everyone's stepping into? What do those look like? And then simply you have to have these conversations with people. You can't present a change in a command and control style. You have to acknowledge that this is an emotional process. And this is really, really where managers the world over fall down, because they don't want to deal with the emotions. And it's a huge missed opportunity. And it's really the key to the most effective and the most inspirational leadership, and it's what's called companionate love, which is this sense of really caring about the people you're with, and it's amazingly freeing to focus on caring for people rather than trying to deny these realities.
And so if I'm a leader and some change is happening and I'm recognizing, okay, we're going from this and this is where people are going to be frustrated or upset, and this is where I need to get my team to go to.
Yep.
Is there like what are the most important things at that point for me to think about as a leader? Is it like my communication? Is it how I manage or track the change and make a project map or whatever else? What are the things that really allow me to set off on that change in the best way possible?
Well, if you follow this principle of adaptive leadership, then the change is really, really needs to be centered on the team, on the group of people. And that requires a pretty sophisticated leadership approach around, again, accepting that this is going to be difficult for people and accepting that you can't direct it. You can't just say, it's not a point and click process. So absolutely, there has to be a sense of where the change is meant to be headed and what it's supposed to be about. There are some logical things that you have to be able to cover. It has to make sense. If it sounds completely bonkers, no one's going to even start, and they're going to leave or they're going to disengage. But then the signals of change, when people are trying to move through the process, you say, here's plan A, we need to go to plan B, and we have some new roles and responsibilities, and we have these discussions, and we're doing all the steps, all the tools, and there are many, many frameworks out there. So pick one, but follow one. And then you look for the signals of how it's actually being accepted. You look for human behaviors of either resistance or complaining or frustration or fatigue or some other work avoidance. And then you've got to address those, and you have to address them pretty compassionately, especially if the change is severe, if there's a huge layoff, a huge restructuring. And of course, this has happened a lot recently, but this happens at every downturn cycle. If you're really asking people to join into the recovery and the renewal period, you better be pretty patient with them. You better be very understanding that not only have they lost people, their friends, especially in startups, there's what's called the death of the dream. And people get together in a startup and they think they're going to change the world, and they very well may do that. But the first sign of that loss is significant for early stage people. And as a founder, you know this. You rely on the mission. You rely on this shared purpose, and because it's a small group, everybody can touch it. So if, for example, you had a big change and you got angry with people for being upset, that's a lot of your organizational currency and credibility out the window. So you have to be very patient. You have to probably try to engage people in different ways, formally and informally, in some groups. You have to be very receptive to the feedback. You have to be very receptive to things that you might not want to hear, like, hey, this isn't going very well because we're still confused. We don't get it. So you try again. And obviously at a certain point, the process plays itself out. You either see that it's working or you see that it's not working. And if it's not working, then unfortunately you have to change again. But it's change really from a power perspective is most effective when it's most human. And that's why when anyone who comes along and says, hey, I have the change, I have all the answers, I'm the one, that's nonsense. That's hero leadership, apple crapple.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because we went through a round of layoffs last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And as well as lots of companies. Yeah. And I think there was a real lack of understanding of how much of an impact that has on the organization and the period of time it has an impact. Yeah. Even if it's like subtle, and not like in your face, people aren't necessarily outwardly complaining. Like 18 months later, we're starting to feel like the energy started to return, I think. And it's taken that long. And I think a lot of companies that have gone through this layoff and have treated it in a way that's just we're just going to make this decision. A month later, we'll be normal again. I've realized that, this actually has a lasting impact on the organization.
It absolutely becomes part of, well, maybe not the origin story, certainly part of the history. And I think it was William Faulkner who said, history isn't over. It's not even past. I mean, this is what I'm saying. when founders say, no, we'll deal with this later. No, actually, this is what's happening right now. This is the future of your company right now, or the team dynamics. It's the cultural understanding. It's the gaps between what you as a leader say and what people as non-leaders experience. So there's a real problem with leaders going through a layoff, and because there's a mechanical and a legal and a very technical structure to the whole thing that becomes very dry and very impersonal when you're talking about the paperwork for different agreements, and you're talking about severance this and exit that and transitions and the survivors as opposed to the people who are affected. And we use all these euphemisms because the individuals managing the restructuring and actually letting people go, it's a very, very emotionally difficult and draining process. And what can happen often is that the managers who were doing all of this in the background in secret, because the rest of the company can't know about it, they emerge from whatever period of project work, and they're absolutely drained. And the last thing that they want to do is buck themselves up and deal with people who are learning of this for the first time, and people who are learning about what's happening on the ground and how they're going to be affected, and all of this transition work. So this is where transition is almost voluntarily ignored by people in power, because they're either tired, don't want to deal with it, don't know how to deal with it, or just want to tell people to move on because that's life and this is business. It's not personal. And all that's nonsense. Yeah. So those kinds of organizations that face a restructuring in a bad way, in a poor way, probably weren't being run very well before the restructuring. So again, your future is right now from an organizational perspective, from a leadership perspective. Right now is your future. And most really, really competent leaders recognize that what you're trying to do when you talk about team health and organizational health is you are trying to put things in place so that if the team or the company gets sick, it can recover as quickly as possible, just like human health. And focusing on the team health and the team balance prevents sickness. It prevents dysfunction and things from falling apart. So almost the period of change is almost too late for a leader, for a CEO to all of a sudden get it. Yeah. There are tips you can do, but it requires a lot of top-down pressure from a CEO. A board would have to say, look, this is a significant change. I don't think you're ready for it. You need someone who's going to come in here and guide you on this and help you and hold a mirror up to you so you don't screw things up. And I've been part of these processes before, both restructurings that have gone well and have been humane, and some that have just been awful. Yeah. And that then also becomes your future, how you manage that.
Absolutely. There's a lot that we can dig into there. One of the things that came up for me is, how do you know when change is going well or badly as a leader? Like, are you measuring? You said some things earlier of, feedback you're getting from the team, complaining or unhappiness. Is that something you pick up in one-to-ones, for example, and just being close to the people in your team and having a great relationship? Is it surveys you're sending out like EMPS or so on and so forth? Is there a good way of capturing that and determining if your change is going to plan or not? And does remote, I guess it's a separate topic, does being remote make change harder? Because I'm kind of thinking about some of the stuff we were saying around the layoffs, and I think some of the missteps people made was just the complications of doing something like that at mass scale remotely. And it felt very impersonal over a screen.
Sure.
So the same, I guess, would apply to some big change projects that happen. So I guess how do leaders know if it's going well or not, and the remote piece?
I think on the ground, yes, all of the communication channels you mentioned need to be accessed,
right?
And quite assertively and quite energetically accessed. I mean, communication is key. However, it's not broadcast communication all the time. There's a bit of that, but mostly it's listening. Mostly it's reflection. Mostly it's absorbing how people are experiencing this. Because again, if I'm in a leadership role and I have a certain amount of power over the people I've just inflicted this change on, I need to know how they're feeling. I can't tell them how they're feeling. I can't give them another rationale for the reason for this if they're upset. You know, someone comes and says, "Oh, this, I'm not doing very well with this," or "I don't understand this," or maybe they're just not executing well on the new sales plan, let's say. And if I just assume that I can tell them, if I can talk them through it, well, it probably means I'm not a very good manager, first of all. So it's really about listening. It's really about recognizing that all of these different dynamics are going on. And ultimately, I mean, at bottom, leadership is relational. It is a relationship. So better leaders have the relationship skills, and they're absolutely practiced. They're things that you can learn. One of the most damaging fictions out there is that leadership cannot be learned, and it is an observable, learnable practice. You just have to be able to pay the price, because there is a cost to this. Most people think that they can just go and be a leader and point and tell people what to do and change. No, that's not it. If people are suffering through this, if they're in some pain, you actually have to go and participate in their pain and participate in their discomfort and participate in their unfamiliarity about the unknown. If you do that, and this is not therapy, this is not actually solving their problems for them, but if you engage with them on this at a business level, at a level of, I understand what you're going through, and if you create what's called a container, a contained space where people can work through this safely, where they can talk about how right and wrong these things are and how good and bad they're feeling about this and how effective and ineffective. If you can do all this, if you can absorb all of that, you've gone a long way to actually helping people reestablish their own orientation and reestablish their own sense of direction. And again, that's what most effective leaders try to do. They try to keep the teams in some ways self-regulating and not managing themselves, so to speak, but doing their own work. And the work of a team has to be separate from the work of a leader.
Yeah. And do you think that remote has made it more difficult?
I think it invariably has, with some exceptions. I think this is not a galloping insight to anyone who's been through the pandemic. I think intact teams made the switch to remote working or hybrid working a bit better than brand new teams. I think there's an absolute gap in just the human behavior, and again, this relational nature of work when you have a remote organization. There are lots of ways to get around this in terms of increasing or establishing set times to actually meet and create these relationships. Or you have to do it like the benchmark remote companies. You have to look at a company like Buffer, which has not over-invested, but hyper-invested in the whole process of how to make these people successful who come in. And they're very, very diligent and disciplined about how they structure their work and how they evaluate candidates and how they welcome people and how they lead them and develop them and grow them over time. And it's admirable. I mean, I think from an organizational perspective, it really, really is, they're a role model. And many other companies don't want to or can't, but usually don't want to put in that investment. They want to take a shortcut. They want hybrid working or remote working because it's cheaper than having an office. I get that. And yet that opens up a different organizational gap. And so you have to fill it somehow.
Yeah.
And yes, the restructuring is both made easier and more brutal when it's done remotely.
And there's a trend at the moment, which you probably have noticed in the kind of tech world, tech CEO world, and it was led by Elon Musk coming into Twitter and firing like 2/3 of the team.
Sure.
Of this notion that you communicate change to the team, anyone who's not on board gets fired. There's this thing that's kind of happening and permeating.
Sure.
That definitely seems contrasting to what you're saying, and I think I definitely like the approach that you're saying. When does it become too much resistance from members of the team in terms of change, and how does the leader spot that? Of like, I'm guiding the team through this change. I'm doing everything I need to, perhaps, or maybe there's things I still need to work on.
Right.
But there's someone who's in this team is making this change impossible.
Right.
Or when does that become how do you spot that and take action?
I think that's the worst case scenario for either a team or a company where there is, certainly if there is resistance, if there's outright sabotage within an organization, then there are real problems. And that has to be dealt with primarily from a perspective of this person, these people clearly don't want to be here. Yeah. And in that way, there are some models around ensuring that people are where they want to be. And a lot of that actually gets down to what is it that individuals most want to do, and what are their strengths and what are their competencies and what are the things that cause them friction. And so a change scenario is an opportunity to open up new ways of engaging with the work, because presumably the work is going to change, that they're going in a different direction or trying work in a different way. This notion of, well, we're cutting our headcount and so we're going to do more with less is the worst message you could send. Yeah. Because that's just nonsense. I mean, everybody who knows, everyone who's doing the work hears this from a CEO and just says, you're having us on. I mean, it's unfair, it's unrealistic, and we're all probably going to leave at some point if that's the way that it happens. So certainly people have to be, at some point, people have to sign up for the change or not. And the degree to which a manager has a relationship with those individuals, with whole teams, that manager is in a really good position doing all the things we've talked about to be in a position to say, this doesn't seem to be working out for you. The company's been going along. It's been this period of time. We've had these ups and downs. We've gone through the stages of grief and everything, and we're coming out a bit, and things are making some traction, and people are doing new things, and there's some success, and we've had some setbacks. But all in all, we've established some new momentum, and you still seem unsettled with this. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about you. And people usually show you what you need to know about them. So if it's an intelligent leader, a capable leader, these are the signals they'll get, and they'll be able to say, perhaps this isn't the right line of work, perhaps this isn't the right company. Let's talk about these options.
This conversation has been fascinating because it seems to all lean on the ability to build great relationships.
Absolutely.
And build trust within your people.
Absolutely.
And do you feel like leaders focus on that enough? And I guess, how could they start if they're not? Is there like steps for them to start building strong relationships in their team and prioritize that?
Some of this definitely depends on where an individual is working. If you're at Unilever, there are a lot of options, lots of learning, lots of structure, lots of ways to go about things. Now, the flip side of that is that it's pretty difficult to actually influence a massive, massive enterprise like Unilever. But they have the structure in place because they do want to develop leaders. Smaller companies that are less resourced and less structured, it'll be harder to do this. You might have to do more on your own. But the the common answer to all of this, yes, is people with power, managers or leaders, need to be better with their power. They need to understand it better always, because it doesn't stop. Leadership doesn't end, and it's learnable, and it's observable and learnable. And so how you go about that, a lot of it depends on where you are in your career, the kind of work you're doing, and really what your own intentions are. The best leadership quote I've come across is by the late Warren Bennis, who said, "Becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself. It's exactly that easy and that difficult. First and foremost, find out what it is you are about and be that." What it is you are about and be that. And that's the key of authenticity, which is to be one's own author. And that's what people are looking for in leadership. They're looking for a sense of authenticity. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever met a founder who said to me, "I want to become a leader." They say, "I want to be a founder, I want to be a CEO," lots of that. And then once they are a CEO, once they are a founder, they talk about working on their leadership. But it's very, very rare to come across someone who says, someone who's not in an organizational function, say, "I want to become a leader," with a capital L. And I think that's what most founders should promote, because everybody, of course, can be a leader, and that's a very popular thing to talk about. It's a little harder to activate, but everyone can be a leader, because leadership is about the future, and it's about creating this environment to succeed in a shared goal, and everybody can contribute to that.
Well, that is a great place to wrap up, I think, and that was an excellent quote. One last question before we go is, what are you most excited about regarding the future of kind of HR?
I think with more access to more stories because of technology, there is a greater opportunity to gain insight and to recognize that as a leader, my situation, I'm not at all unique. It's everywhere. And also to this cross-pollination of disciplines and sectors and environments that provide really, really important insights. So looking at the non-government office, the NGO sector, looking at the charity sector, looking at healthcare, if you're in a technology company, talking to different people about different organizational challenges, because that's the similarity. I mean, all companies have the same issues. And most of them are people issues. They just come in different sizes and shapes. So the ability to share insights and experiences, it's a huge resource. And hopefully technology will enable more of these conversations and more of this opportunity for learning.
Awesome. And where can people find you if they want to get in touch or see any of your posts?
Yes, the easiest thing is probably I'm an executive consultant with the investment organization Astia, which funds high-growth women entrepreneurs and gender-inclusive teams, because gender-inclusive teams produce higher profits, greater innovation, and increased levels of cognitive and emotional intelligence in groups. So it's a pretty good thing to fund. And I'm at Brian at astia.org, BRIAN at ASTIA.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
And I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please follow or subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thank you.